Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com and devnursery.com. And what I want to talk about today is what is localhost. Okay, so if you ever fired up a project using live server or on VS Code, you probably noticed, like, let's see here, I'll open with live server. Then it's going to open up in a browser, which we'll do in a second. And it's going to open up at this website called localhost. Well, in this case, it's 127.0.1, but I could literally swap this out, and this is essentially the default IP address for your local computer from the perspective of your local computer. Okay, so your computer can talk to itself from this particular IP address. And so if I go to the localhost, is a name that sort of is a pseudonym for that IP address. So if I type in localhost, it should take me to the same place. Okay, so localhost literally is just a namespace that your computer is aware of. It just knows that this name exists. That is a replacement for 1.0.1 equals localhost. That's the same thing. Okay, it's just how all computers work. They just know that when there's a server running on 127.0.01, that can also be referred to as localhost. Okay, so essentially what's happening is that technically right now, so if I were to refresh this page, we see that we're running a server on our local host on port 5500. Now, what are these ports? Well, essentially, think of it like a port on the body of water. Okay, there's a bunch of different ports where ships can go in there and unload their ship. Same thing with your computer. Your computer has pretty much an unlimited number of ports. Not quite sure if there really is a max number, which is actually a good question. Let's just check. Maximum IP port number. There we go. There's the, I guess, maximum number. 65563. Okay? So you can have a lot of ports. And now each port can essentially support receiving information and sending information. Okay? Now, typically, like the first 1,000 or so are kind of already called. There's plenty of applications that are already kind of typically in standard using those ports. Pretty much once you get past like 1,000, 2,000, you're in the clear. You can pretty much use the port for development. So by default, Visual Studio Code is using port 5500. Okay, and that's just one way to spin up what's referred to as a static server. Okay, now what does it mean by a static server? A static server serves static files and does nothing else. Okay, if you start learning how to use like things like Express and Buffalo and Ruby on Rails, you'll learn how to create much more dynamic servers that do much more complicated things. But at its simplest, a static server just does this. It takes the folder. So when I hit live server here on this folder, so when I do this index.html file, it's going to take the folder that it's in, which is this jQuery folder, and serve it. And whenever you go to a URL, so if I were to just go to, okay, so that serve the root. Okay, so basically, let me do it differently. Let me show you a different way to start up a server, just to illustrate my point. Because essentially what this is doing, it's taking this HTML CSS folder and serving that. So essentially the URL you're seeing there is saying the localhost 5500 is essentially this HTML CSS folder. Then we're going into the jQuery folder, and if I actually just did this, I just took off the index, it would still work. Because by default, whenever you go to a folder, it's going to look for an index.html file and serve that. So I don't actually have to specify index.html. It'll just look for it. It just knows to look for it. That's why generally you always see index.html, index.html, because it just means you don't have to type it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this folder in my file path thing, open containing folder. I'm going to close that. Well, I'll leave that open for the moment. I'm going to open my terminal in this folder. I'm running right now currently Ubuntu as my operating system. So here's my terminal. Let me just make it the font bigger. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin up a server in the jQuery folder. So I go to cd jQuery, and I'm going to type in this folder again. This server, a live server, is an extension that's built into Visual Studio Code. What language it's using to spin up that server, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Now, if you have PHP on your computer, which generally if you have, I think everything but a Windows computer probably has PHP out of the gate installed on its computer. You can always check by just running this command. Okay. But what I can do is I can type in PHP -s, which means serve, capital S. And then I can type in localhost and type in whatever port I want. So let's try to open it up on port 15658. 15658. That's the port I'm going to open it up on. Okay, and see now I have a server running on 15658 from that folder. So essentially this folder it's serving. So that means when I go to that URL, it should just automatically send me this index.html file. So I will copy that, paste it, and when I go there I get the same thing. Okay, cool. Now you can also do this with Python, and Python also comes out of the gate installed on, and so you can see the information of what's happening every time I go to the website. So see, it realizes that I received a request, so it receives, my computer sent a request to localhost 1568, so it accepted the request, and then it received a request for the CSS file and the app.js file, because again my index.html pulls that CSS and JS file. So it says, hey, can you send me those two? So it accepts those, send those, and then says, okay, I'm done. Okay, and by default it's always going to look for like a favicon or favicon, and I don't have a favicon set up, so it couldn't find it. So that's what I'm seeing here. These are just the logs of the server. Now since I'm doing this in my terminal, I can kill it by hitting Control-C. Control-C kills anything in your terminal, for the most part. Now another way I could do this is with Python. I think I already did this command recently, so let's see if I can find it in my list of commands. Okay, I always forget this command, since I usually use the PHP one. So let's just do a quick search for, there we go. It usually comes straight out of the box on most of your computers. So just need to find the right command. Here we go. So this would be the example of the command on Python. So it's Python-m. Not sure what the -m flag's for. I'm sure if I read the docs it would say it. We're running the simple HTTP server module, and we're going to open it up on port 8000, which you can change the port to whatever you want. Let's see if I run this now. Now it's serving port 8000. Now notice it says serving on port 0.0.0. This is the only other number other than 127.0.0.01 that you should be aware of, because it would be important if you ever decide to start working with Docker. So technically there's more than just one IP address that's sort of like reserved for your local machine. 127.0.0.1 is the one you'll run into pretty much 99% of the time, but in certain situations there's other ones you can designate. And 0.0.0 basically is a catch-all that says basically check all of them. So in this case, it doesn't matter sort of what your computer's default behavior is, if it serves it on 127.0.0.1 or some other local IP address, this should send it to the right one. If you ever use Docker, which I'm not going to get into what Docker is right now, Docker tends to randomly assign one of these local IP addresses to your Docker containers. So that's why you would have to set up your servers and whatnot to serve from 0.0.0.0, so that way, regardless of what Docker assigned to you as an IP address, it gets captured, because 0.0.0.0 means look at all the local IP addresses. Something that took me like a day and a half of reading documentation to figure out when I was learning Docker. So hopefully that saves you time someday. Okay, so let's try that out. Let's go to localhost 8000. And there it is. Okay. And let's see if we can find some of those other IP addresses. Alternatives to 127.0.0. Okay. Let's see here. In your browser, the error message should show unfavorable virus. Okay, so looks like it's more like something that's determined by your router. Okay, so your router determines the IP address. So technically what's going on is when you do 127.0.0.1, it's just basically sending the request to your internet router, and the router's just pretty much sending the request right back. Cool. And the other thing I want to point out is where the two really important ports to remember. Port 80 and port 443, okay? So you notice like how URLs have this HTTP or HTTPS prefix? Well, technically that actually just determines what port it goes to. Okay, HTTP traffic is going to end up going to port 80. It's just a good thing to know. HTTPS traffic goes to port 443. And the reason why this is important is that one day you may set up a web server. So essentially your main like web server interface, which is usually like something like Apache or Nginx, they're going to receive requests from port 80 and port 443. So typically what happens is that you'll set up Apache or Nginx. They'll receive requests at port 80, port 443. They'll ask for a specific website. And then you'll set up configuration files to say, okay, when you get a request for this, like xyz.com, you'll actually send a request to your local host to where that server for that particular project is running on your server. So you might set up a project that's running on port 8000 on your local machine. Nginx receives a request from the outside world on port 80 for that particular project. So then it reroutes that request to your local host 8000 where that particular project is running. So that gives you a kind of an idea of how all this works and what localhost is. So localhost is again just a pseudonym for 127.0.0.1, which is really just the IP address of the machine that you're on, relative to your internet connectedness. And the reason why people use that is it allows them to try out their web projects on their computer and do development. And there's several ways to spin up a server, whether it's Python with this command right here, whether it's PHP with this command right here. And again, if you have either, always make sure you just do like a Python version so you know which version you have. Okay. And then there's the live server on Visual Studio Code. Any of these work, they do pretty much the same thing. It's just about serving the folders in there. But again, the default behavior of a server is that it's going to look for that index.html file first. That's the reason why we always create a index.html file. So my name's Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.